Okie dokie. In this video, we're going to go back to the DOM, go back to our click events or some sort of events, some selection, document.something, and I'm going to apply what we just learned about type assertions and show an example where you need to use it, or you could use a type assertion. It's not the only option. Okay, so let's actually update our index.html. I'm going to add in another element, just an input, and it's going to have type of text. We'll give it a placeholder of, I don't know what this will be for. Let's say this is going to be a to-do list eventually. So placeholder will be enter a to-do. Okay. And then I'm going to also give it an ID so I can select this, and I'm going to call this to-do input or something like that. All right. So I've got this new input over here. And what I want to do via TypeScript is when you click this button, I want to extract the value from that input and do something with it. I want to print it out, and then I want to erase this here and reset the value. So the way that we do that in JavaScript is by using the value property, right? Document, let's do a query, or let's do get element by ID again. And our ID was to do input. Save that to a variable, const input. And if we do input.value, right, this is just a DOM property. Right now it's an empty string. If I put something in there, you can see over here, I'm controlling that, right? Or if I type in here, hello, and I read out input.value, we see that it contains hello. Okay, so that's what I want to do in TypeScript. I want to read that value. Maybe I want to write to that value. So the first thing I've got to do is select that element. So it has the ID of to do input. Let's reactivate that code and then do a const input equals document.getElementById by ID to do input. Okay. And we can insist that it exists because in this situation, we know it's there when the page loads. It's not something that's dynamic. It's always supposed to be there. So I'll put that exclamation point, although that's just a personal preference. Otherwise, you use the question mark optional chaining operator. And then I'm going to look at input. What is the type of input? What is TypeScript viewing input as? An HTML element, just a generic HTML element. It has no idea that this is supposed to be an input and this is supposed to be a button. And that hasn't been a problem for adding an event listener. But what I want to do is access input.value, and TypeScript's now going to complain. It says value does not exist on this generic HTML element type. That exists on an HTML input element because a button doesn't have a value. Oh, actually it could, but an image doesn't have a value, for example. Just a generic HTML element, they don't all have values. So it doesn't work. I need to tell TypeScript this input is not just any HTML element. It's actually an HTML input element. If we just looked at it over here, if I do a console.dir, I hate that we have to do that, input, scroll all the way down, there we go, HTML input element. Now that has nothing to do with TypeScript, but TypeScript uses that name. There's an interface called HTML input element. Just like there's one for HTML element, if I go to type definition, here is just our generic HTML element. It doesn't have a value property. But if we look in here for HTML input element, we can see that it extends HTML element. There's our extend keyword, two interfaces, one extending another. And what does it add on? A bunch of stuff, including somewhere, max length, min length, and it's alphabetical. Come on, TUV. Here we are, value. It's a string. So that is the actual type we want to tell TypeScript to use. We know that this is an input we're selecting, but how is TypeScript to know that? It doesn't know what has this ID. It's not that smart, and it can't look at our HTML. It can only look at what it sees in this file. So this is where we can cast it and say, actually, instead of just as a generic HTML element, which is the default, we're going to say as HTML input element. And now input is treated as that type, HTML input element, and that has a value, and we don't get a complaint. So then I can do something like, alert input.value, We're not going to build an app in this video, but then we can set it to be an empty string again. We'll reset it. Okay. So if I type something in here like chicken with 1K, click it, we see it's a little hard. I don't think I can actually zoom in. Yeah, I can't. But we see chicken right there. And then our input empties out. So we needed to use a type assertion there to tell TypeScript that this is an HTML input element, not just a generic element. And if I wanted to, I could tell TypeScript this is an HTML button element, but we don't really need to in this situation if all that we're doing is adding a click event, because the generic HTML element works just fine to add an event listener. But why not be more specific? HTML button element. And if we view that type definition, you'll see that the interface HTML button element extends regular HTML element, and it adds on things like disabled. So we can disable the button, right? The form target, the type of the button. So these are just different things that we probably would want to have access to. We want to be more specific. Oh, one other thing I'll show is that there's an alternate syntax for type assertions. Instead of using the as keyword, if I get rid of that, I can use angle brackets, and access or add a type in HTML input element, and then follow it by the thing that I'm trying to assert the type of. And then I could do dot value, for example. If I didn't have this, then input is just a generic HTML element. But now I'm telling TypeScript, no, I'm asserting its HTML input element right here. This syntax, though, is less common in general, but also doesn't work with JSX. So if you're writing React code, it gets very freaked out because these angle brackets are used to write your templating, right, your HTML. So in general, I avoid that, but we are going to see this syntax later on when we talk about generics. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the as syntax. I think it's also just clearer what's happening, right? We're getting something back, and then we're essentially casting it. We're asserting we know more. And it's just a little easier to read, even if it's a little extra. You got spaces, and I guess you could complain that it's a little longer, but I think it's better. But that's just my opinion. So HTML input element. And there we go. This should work again. Type my stuff in there, click, and we're good to go. So that's type assertions.